That actually makes me think of a couple projects we were just looking at recently, and many over over my lifetime of building projects, where I think that the critical issue here is one with semantics, defining things, but I think then it's saying who's responsible for doing those things. So let's
Mhm.
define the customer journey. What
Yeah.
does that look like? What are all the steps in that journey? Now let's
Mm.
take this one particular application form process and credit scoring process, and maybe those are two processes. Who owns those? What's the user interface? Who owns
Mm-mm.
the interfaces and the systems that already exist today? And really, as you say, assembling a holistic team of user
Mm.
experience, user interface, systems, storage, back end, front end, mobile, and saying, this is a product offering, this is a service offering that we're creating for the
Right.
customer, and that
Mhm.
requires all of these people and includes now an element from the machine learning or the statistical team or the AI team, if they have one,
Mm.
to then say, oh, now we're going to bring them in the fold. And together we're going to create a service that it works really well for this customer that has
Mm.
elements from all of these different players. And I think people don't think of this as product management, which is really ultimately what it is.
It is, because what you're doing is building a product. And particularly when you're working with enterprises, unlike tech companies, they don't have a product mindset. Recently, I've been talking to a number of banks who are now talking to me about how do we build that product mindset like a tech company, where that product mindset naturally has the idea that there's lots of components in there. And what you end up with, and I've seen many times, is because maybe they're thinking about the key component as being that, let's say in our example, the credit scoring. So we'll get somebody to solve that. And then they realize we need a user interface. So what they do is, instead of building the team, they get the data scientist who's building the model to build a user interface. And they're paying 10 times cost to actually do that for somebody who's probably not that good at it anyway, instead of being very holistic, like you said, and putting together a product team for an entire product with all the components in it. And that's really one of education too, because I tend to very much focus on the enterprise. And those business leaders in enterprise just don't know this. They don't come from that world. They don't come from a software engineering world. They don't come from a tech product world. So they don't think in those terms. And their terms are just come in and do it. And they think that, or their expectation is, you can come in and do the whole shebang, which you may be able to do, but you're probably not. If you're a data scientist, you're definitely not the right person to be building a user interface. Conversely, if you can do web forms, you can't then step on and build an analytic credit scoring model. So you need to build a team. And that's really one of education, when you go in and talk to these business leaders and just tell them this is what you need. And that's, I think that's a real consultative skill to be able to do that and get them to buy into that.
To understand that when you're building a new service offering, that is a product and should be treated with the rigor and the discipline that's required to launch new products correctly.
Mm.
Understand your user, understand the requirements, understand the holistic system, and
Right.
then integrate in, pull in the right team to execute that to make it a complete product offering that the user will ultimately use.
Mm. I think that's really the key point. Should we
I
talk
like
about
that. I
that?
didn't think we were going to go that direction, but actually it just naturally flowed that direction of, yeah, this is important. I like that one. That was a good one. Longer than I was thinking. Could probably split even that into two parts, because I think that's a whole like separate thing, that building services is product management. Like,
Mm.
honestly, that's a standalone clip just to
Yeah.
say building a service is a product management exercise.
Right, right. And I did have that conversation last week with a business leader at a bank, because I was introducing them to what tech giants do. And they said he'd obviously been reading about product teams. I said, yeah, you need to be thinking about your services as products and building product teams,
Right.
which currently you don't have. You have people that work in commercial lending, which is a product, but they're not really organized like a software product team,
Right.
because they come from a world of fill out this piece of paper, and they don't really have that mindset. At least some of them, it sounds like, are starting to read up and understand that, yes, we need to be building that. And I think that's going to be an interesting reorganization at those kind of many enterprises. When they start to be more digital, they can start to reorganize like a tech giant.
I don't know that they ever will. And this is I know we're not recording. I guess we are still recording this, but this idea of building these product teams, that is Amazon's strength. It always has been, right? The two pizza team. Hey, you're going to define, articulate, build, product manage, build, and operate a service. And that service is a tiny composed microservice. And now you also have to promote it and pitch it to all the other teams and get them to start using it, and also provide support to the end customer. And that team is completely responsible for that one microservice. And it might be 6 people or 8 people, but they have to do the entire life cycle from concept to operation over time.
Oh, right. That's interesting.
And they've launched, this is an old number, but they had at one point 3,000 discrete microservices. They're probably up to 6,000 or something at this point. Each one of those is part of their layer cake from S3, their first object store, all the way up to the more complex services they have now, which sit on top of hundreds and hundreds of other microservices. This is also an old story. Their webpage, when you would go to even just Amazon and just load the front page of Amazon.com, that calls 200 to 300 sub microservices just to execute that page. And each of those is from another. It's wild. And so I think what people have never understood is that Amazon is a microservices factory. And that is their fundamental distinction between them and every other business in the world. That's like what you said. Oh, we're in the commercial lending department. It's not my job to make the customer's job easier to make this happen in time. Whereas Lemonade comes along to switch industries and says, no, we're going to process insurance applications and give an answer in 30 seconds. You can't do that with a company of departments, but you can do that with a product team.
That's microservice idea is interesting.